Well, homeowners in Washington state who are anticipating a divorce, many times people ask us at Pacific Northwest Family Law if their house is just going to be divided 50-50 and how that works. That's a more complex question that many people anticipate. First thing to start off is that Washington state is a community property state. That doesn't mean that each spouse owns 50% of the house. It means they both own an undivided interest in the house. You own 100% at the same time your spouse owns 100% of the house. Now, if you do the math, yeah, that does come to 50-50, but that's not how the courts will usually approach it because the courts have full discretion to divide that however is fair. Now, fair does not always mean equal. So it might mean that one spouse receives 60% or 70%, while the other spouse receives 40% or 30%. Be careful you don't approach this question as though you each get 50-50, because that's not necessarily what the law says. Now, when it comes to dividing a house, the first thing that you have to determine is what is the equity or value. To do that, you usually need some kind of professional evaluation of the house. An appraiser that you would hire privately is one expert and probably the best expert to get for the valuation of the house. Some other ways to value a house is you can go to some online sites such as Zillow or Realtor that give market kind of guesses using whatever algorithm they have. Those can be good, but they don't always handle markets that have very fast turnover well, and they're not particularly accurate. In fact, we probably wouldn't use anything like that if we had to prove it in court and have a trial. Now, if you and your spouse agree on the value of the house based on that, that's a different question. Something that you should discuss with your attorney is that really the fair way to value it. For example, if your housing market is rapidly going up or rapidly going down, it's probably not going to be the best way to determine the value. But the first thing you need to do is determine what the value of the house is. Now, the second then is how much equity do you have? So the equity is going to be the value of the house minus what you owe or the mortgage amount. So once you know the equity, then you can approach that and how you divide that. Now, when it comes to division, there's a few different ways. The easiest way to divide a house is to sell it and see how much you can get for it. If you do that, you don't have to get an appraiser until you go to sell it. And really, your real estate agent, if you get a good one, will be able to sell it for the best price in the market. And then you have cash. Cash is then easy to divide. However, oftentimes one spouse or the other would like to keep the house. So there's a couple ways that can work. First, you need to determine how much the equity is. And essentially what you're going to do then is the spouse who wants to keep the house will buy out the interest that the other spouse has in the house. So for example, if the house is worth $100 and you agree that each spouse gets half of that, the first spouse needs to come up with $50 to give to the other spouse. Now that can be done in a couple different ways. It can be done through a refinance of the house where you take some cash out, increase the mortgage, and use that cash out to provide to the other spouse any kind of division where you keep the house. You'll want to make sure it is refinanced and retitled into the spouse who's keeping its name so that the spouse who is walking away with a buyout no longer has an obligation to the bank for the mortgage. Because if the spouse who's keeping the house defaults on the mortgage, the bank can still come after the other spouse whose name is on the mortgage and the title of the house, because that's what you signed up for. And the bank doesn't care if you had a divorce and you had an agreement. It's still going to ding you on your credit report. So you can either refinance the house or you look at the other assets and the spouse who is keeping the house gets fewer other assets while the spouse who is not keeping the house gets more. So assets that you'll want to look at, maybe a business or investments or retirement accounts. Those are three of the more common large assets that you might have. There's a few different ways to approach division of the house so that you don't have to then turn around and sell it. As long as you agree on the valuation of the house, everything else can be done. Now, you will want to work with a professional, especially if you're dealing with these large assets with an attorney, to make sure the language is written down and the agreement is preserved in writing so that it can be enforced later in a court, and also included in final divorce documents. That way you reduce the chance that there's going to be any breaking of the promise or further litigation after you think everything is done. So I hope that helps. Houses can be complex assets. We deal with them all the time at Pacific Northwest Family Law. My name's Zachary C. Ashby. If you found this helpful or you know a friend who might benefit, please share it with them. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel that helps other people to find us and helps get this information out there. Thank you.